Hello ladies, gents and servants of the dark. I've been finishing a lot of games lately on my spare time, and while this is rewarding all of itself, I felt there was a missed opportunity with each one, as if I wasn't getting all I could from the experience. So I've decided to tell you about the games I finished from now on and figure out what made them work for me. Today we're going to take a thorough look at King's Bounty: The Dark Side, and why I was driven to complete it. It's not so much an endorsement on why you should play it, but rather an analysis of what makes a game compelling to my personal taste. I probably shouldn't have started with this one, it's pretty obscure and all that, but whatever, who cares? There's plenty more games to talk about in the future. It's very likely you don't know a damn thing about King's Bounty, so here's a primer. The Dark Side is only the last installment on a long-running series that started with The Legend, which was in itself the successor to the original King's Bounty. Each game in this revival series is basically the same, and all it changes is the story, characters, and locations you visit, each time with new units to field and items to use. It's very reminiscent of the Heroes of Might and Magic series, except in this game you control only one hero that increases in power throughout the whole adventure. You'll spend your time doing three things: traveling and exploring the world, managing your character and army, and battling in tactical turn-based combat. This last part is very much the meat of the game and what everything else is geared toward. You build your army and characters so you can crush the opposition with minimal losses and continue progressing. I enjoy it all, but the world exploration is my favorite part of playing the game. You run around collecting everything you find, seeing the sights, talking to NPCs, and browsing shops. Each region is a new theme, carefully crafted with tons of little resources to find and a crap ton of fools to murder, and often with one or two underground dungeons on top of that. All these things you find allow you to equip your character with a huge variety of equipment, and all the fights you get into give you experience, which levels you up, which gives you runes, otherwise known as skill points you can spend. Items and levels and talent tree choices will raise your stats. Rage and mana, which are resources you spend in combat to power your abilities and spells. Attack, or how hard your troops hit. Defense, or how much damage your troops mitigate. Magic, or how effective your spells are. And leadership, or how many idiots you can convince to follow you into battle. And follow you into battle they will. You will get into literally hundreds of fights in the game. I wouldn't be surprised if the count goes over 1,000. They're extremely abstract, your troops being represented in stack of units. A single stack could contain anything from a couple black dragons to 1,000 strong skeleton horde. Each unit takes their turn depending on their initiative stat, at which point you can choose to move them, shoot if they can, attack if they're close enough, or use their special abilities. To back up your units, you have a large variety of spells and up to 9 different rage abilities. Rage is a different sort of mana that builds up as your troops deal and take damage. You will aim your every strategy at slaughtering the most enemies while minimizing your losses. In fact, minimizing losses is what you'll always be thinking about. The less troops you lose, the longer you can keep going forward without spending time and money reinforcing your army. There are also certain types of elite troops that are in very limited supply, so if you're terribly fond of them, you really go out of your way not to suffer any casualties. Though you're often showered with cash, there are tons of things to spend coin on in this game, including a pretty well-designed money sink in the late game, so your efforts to save money will make a pretty big difference on what you can afford. I assume it's the number one concern on higher difficulty levels. I say I assume because I've never played the game in any difficulty higher than normal for a number of issues that I'll be telling you all about. In every King's Bounty game, you pick a class at the start. This choice is a specialization in either quality troops and rage, commanding lots of troops, or having powerful magic. The Dark Side takes this a step further by making each class into an actual character. An orc for strength, a demoness for charisma, and a vampire for magics. They have their own starting area and different dialogue for the entire game, sometimes even variations on the quests, but most of the time it's going to be a largely cosmetic difference. The story for these games is little more than an excuse for the gameplay to happen. Don't get me wrong, there's a ton of text and it's charming for the most part, but you could play through most of the game only reading quest objectives. In the Dark Side, you start as one of the aforementioned characters, and then the Forces of Light have decided to attack you and take over your homeland. You become a refugee that meets with the other two playable characters, and with the help of the Spirit of Darkness, you are tasked with exacting bloody revenge. With the main objective being to corrupt their most loyal, faithful, beautiful, and happy subjects to your cause by any means necessary so that you can vanquish the light once and for all. Though the graphics engine is nothing fancy and is rather dated by now, the game is still beautiful to look at thanks to its cartoonish and colorful art style reminiscent of World of Warcraft. Later on you get the ability to fly everywhere, and this really showcases how pretty the landscapes are. The sound effects are nothing special, but the soundtrack for every King's Bounty is absolutely lovely. Unfortunately though, it's been reused over and over and over, so if you have played through the whole series like I have, you might not enjoy it so much. This one right here is stuck in my head forever and ever till the end of time 100 years after listening to it for hours on end. But hey, you can always turn it off and listen to your own stuff. The game lends itself well to that. The series has built upon its selection of troops with every iteration, and by now it's damn staggering. I didn't actually count them, but there's something like 100 different creatures you can field. They are balanced by their leadership requirement. Powerful creatures are worth more leadership, so you can't carry as many of them. There are a few compositions that are way better than others, but they are viable, at least on normal difficulty. Nothing is stopping you from running around with massive skeletons, zombies, fire elementals, and lowly gobos. There are also several setups that will allow for a self-sustaining army, either through character talents or vampirism or self-resurrection or necromancy, then you carry forward without having to reinforce for long periods of time. A big chunk of the fun for me comes from trying out new creatures and combinations, and though I came up with a few near optimal builds, I'd change it up after a couple dozen fights, just to see what else I could do. The game keeps making available new types of units all the way to the end of the game, and it rarely felt like I was lacking choices. You also don't hurt for choices where equipment is concerned, though most of them will give you a flat bonus to some stat. Many also have a specific property that will make it a tactical decision whether to wield one thing or another depending on what you're about to face. Not that I ever bother because I'm a lazy mofo, and at least on normal you can always win anyway without them. They may also give huge bonuses to a very specific unit type, maybe driving you to build an army around that. Several can be upgraded into more powerful versions through a neat little system of battling the guardians inside the item. It just takes you into another battle realm, and you get to fight the guardians for a better item. Your item slots expand later on as you recruit companions. Yeah, they're all slaves. They're all slaves in one way or another. Admittedly, there are plenty of filler items that don't add anything new, and you'll find a lot of stuff that you'll sell without ever using. You'll also end up with a lot of orphaned items from different incomplete sets, and I'm quite certain that there's a degree of randomization to the loot, because I scoured every corner of the world and only completed one of the many collections I encountered. Lame. The game world is huge, and while this is good and bad, there's no doubt that there's a ton of content in this game to keep you occupied. Every King's Bounty game is consistent about this one way or another. In the dark side, the world is divided in a total of 10 islands to explore, 12 with the DLC, plus a few large realms besides, and each one of those will take you several hours to complete. Every place has its own story and NPCs and quest lines written for it, sometimes sending you to entirely different areas to complete them. Pretty much every new realm boils down to the same thing though. In no specific order, explore the place, fetch quest items, often by force, sometimes just by visiting the right person, and destroy the opposition. Like I mentioned, there are 3 distinct characters, and many NPCs in the world would react differently to them. That takes a lot of work for a game this size, and I appreciate it. I played through with the Demoness because always titties. And though I already started a vampire playthrough, get bent you filthy orc. I probably won't finish it. I love the game and all, but I really don't want to spend another 80 hours in it. You do atrocious things to progress this story, and it's always cartoony and non-graphic. It all happens in text prompts and abstraction, but there are some real messed up things that your characters will be up to, such as enslaving and torturing perfectly innocent NPCs, taking literally thousands of prisoners and sacrificing them to evil mad science, headlined by a scientist named Marie Curie, of all people, not to mention the wholesale slaughter of entire populations in the name of the dark. My all-time favorite is when one of your faithful mad scientists asks you to maybe bring him an ogre and a little girl so he can observe closely how the girl is devoured. For science! And take a look at some fun reminiscing that you do with your childhood friend in Demonland. Do you remember, Bastet, when we found that knight wandering our halls?
Of course I do. That was terribly funny. We even bet on whether or not he would survive 2 succubus kisses. He was so funny. At first he fell in love with me, then with you, and then he finally went crazy when he saw us turn into horrible demons and start devouring him alive. We had a great time, sister. It's a pity that it went by so fast.
And do you remember, Bastet, how we played with that elven girl?
You always knew how to play a joke, sister. The elven girl thought that she could behave with insolence since she was not affected by the succubus spell. It was awfully funny when you turned into a Cerberus and bit her in half. She was such a funny elf, not afraid of a succubus. What a hilarious girl.
This is all justified, and do note the air quotes, justified in the grudge that the Servants of the Dark holds against the Light, and how the Servants of the Light truly are a bunch of racist xenophobes that have routinely slaughtered orcs, demons, and undead for sport, zeal, and glory. You're often looked down upon by your adversaries and discriminated against simply because you're part of the malevolent races. So obviously you need to prove them wrong by going on a rampage through their homes and destroying everything in your path. So, Israel, you might say right now, maybe you should put this in the bad section? Absolutely not! This game embraces its premise. It doesn't portray the Servants of the Dark as misunderstood victims that just want to get along. These are creatures whose very nature allows them to do such horrible things, and see them as perfectly normal. They're simply not horrible to them. It's hilarious. Speaking of doing horrible things, there are several points in the game where you can actually choose how a quest line will progress. There are not that many of them, but they do exist. Things like two undead masters at odds with one another, and you can choose to either get rid of one or do the long quest to broker peace. In Sandy Island, there are 3 different pirate strongholds, and it's entirely up to you which 2 you want to erase from the face of Netana in order to gain your own true faithful servant. Netana is the name of the world, by the way, and it rests on the back of a giant turtle, like a very poor Discworld reference. Anyway, you're still doing terrible things and callous and cruel things, but you get to pick which. It's a shame that these choices are few and far between. Most of the time the quest lines will be a linear trudge through a dozen hoops until you reach the end battle against some hero or another. The limited but appreciated choices extend to the world progression itself. For most of the game, you'll have more than one region to explore at any pace you want. If you get bored of an area or you're getting your ass kicked, chances are you can go somewhere else for a while and get things done. Alternatively, you can choose to face really hard enemies on purpose to have the challenge without having to restart on a different difficulty level. These guys will level you up in a hurry, enabling you to maybe come back to somewhere you found boring and tear a bloody path through the place. Progress is only gated by the power of the enemy armies, so if you're powerful enough to destroy the guys guarding the nautical charge to the next island, then you are free to go there. So you'll spend most of your time doing the tactical combat thing. Overall, I have a very good opinion of it, even after all the hundreds of battles, and I'd even call it great, but I feel I'm biased by my addiction to progression in this game. Positioning is always important, as is countering enemy abilities, neutralizing high-priority threats, that kind of thing. In nearly every fight, you will be making decisions that make a difference on the number of casualties you'll be suffering. There are lots of choices for strategies and which spells to use and when to use the unit's skills and which rage ability is the optimal one. You can hang back and blow up the enemy from afar or charge in with the tough bastards in your army, or single focus a dangerous unit and then raise it from the dead. You can focus on summoning lots of extra troops to defend the real units. You can turn the enemies against one another. You have to watch out for casters and powerful archers and extremely fast dragons that will immediately fly over to your vulnerable folks. Once you get a feel of what the AI will probably do, you start thinking turns ahead in terms of where to place your guys for maximum effect. Battlegrounds will most of the time have randomly placed obstacles and traps, and they never fail to reflect the actual environment that you're traveling. So yeah, if you're into turn-based tactics, it's a great bit of gameplay. And there's just too much of it. That's the main problem why most players out there won't bother getting to the end. Simply put, the game is a slog. The map is huge with tons of things to collect and fools to fight, yeah, alright. But a way to rephrase that is to say that the game is chock full of battles that don't really need to be there. Especially the ones that happen against nearly identical army compositions, one after another after another. Like my chronic crack addiction, game sessions with King's Bounty are an emotional cycle of excitement at first, transitioning to apathy, numbness, utter tedium, and then resentment, and yet another battle after a couple hours of play. This is why enabling a higher difficulty level seems like madness to me. The added challenge might give you a slightly more interesting fights and a real struggle with your finances, but the trade-off is a huge time investment I'm simply not willing to make. Crucially though, and I mean it, I really don't want to leave you with a bad impression. I very much enjoyed this game. I only need to take a 20-minute break to get that feeling again of I want to play King's Bounty. Addiction is a powerful thing. That being said, it has a number of issues. The combat camera is pretty infuriating sometimes. It allows limited rotation and panning, and it will do for the most part. But it's really bad right here, assaulting a castle. It prevents you from panning it entirely and only lets you rotate it a negligible degree. In these situations, I found myself actually impaired. It was hard to tell which unit I was controlling or targeting, and I simply could not see the hazards on the ground, which led to accidental damage. I have no idea why it's restricted so, though I would suspect it has much to do with a castle model that's little more than a cardboard cutout. Remember that item upgrade system I mentioned? Well, there's no telling how hard the fight is going to be before you are actually inside, so you will often find the guardians will murder your anus without recourse. It's no big deal if you're a safe-scumming piece of garbage like I am, but I can see the feature being the bane of an Iron Man run, for example. I said the sound effects are nothing to write home about. Well, what's truly memorable about them, and not in a good way, is the sound that some idle animations make. You see, during battle, enemies will do their idle animation all the time. It's usually fine, it makes them look alive and all that, but some enemies have a very loud, very repetitive idle animation. Get used to hearing this sound a lot. A lot. A lot. A lot. A lot. The tactical battle AI is passable? It's not horrendous, but definitely easy to trick. The enemies have a predilection for attacking summoned troops instead of the real ones, as well as members of their own team that have been temporarily turned by a spell. Perhaps inconsistent and unpredictable are the best words to describe it, which kind of keeps you in your toes, but is nowhere near what an actual human being would do against you. It's forgivable against wild packs of monsters, but enemy heroes really should be smarter. Later on in the game, your army size becomes gargantuan, facing against armies that are even bigger, to the point that it's just all really ridiculous, honestly. You simply need to embrace the abstraction and accept that there is no basis in reality. None of the enemy NPCs in the game will ever acknowledge the thousands of demons and undead at their door, or the flights of dragons throwing shade upon their parapets. The talent trees are pretty boring. Most of them are stat upgrades, plus rage generation, plus mana, plus attack or defense, plus leadership, plus barf. And I don't mean they're not important, they're significant and vital to your survival, and the choice-making process itself is compelling. But the bonuses themselves? They are not very creative. There are a few notable exceptions though, like Tactics, which allows you to get better positioning for your units at the start of the fight, or Recruiter, which randomly replenishes some of your troops after battle, among several more. The writing is bad, like hilariously bad. There is clearly a lot of intentional camp, and the game never takes itself seriously, so you could say a good chunk, maybe even a majority, is bad on purpose. But if your writing is bad on purpose, guess what? It's still bad writing. So it can be boring, it can be funny, it can be mostly forgettable. But if I had to pick a single word to describe it, it would be shallow. Everything and everybody is an archetype at best, and a stereotype at worst. All characters have only one motivation or theme that defines them, and that's it. There is exactly one plot twist in the main narrative, and it comes at the end. To be fair though, the story actually does what it's designed to do, which is keep the gameplay going forward without getting in the way. I don't play King's Bounty for the riveting narrative. It's a Russian developer, and I often get the feeling that a lot of the terrible writing comes from a bad translation into English. And this from Russia-ness is felt in many other places, like item and skill descriptions that make no damn sense. What is +1 to fire? What exactly are you trying to tell me here? Units, probability of returning 10% damage, 15% incurred by an enemy warrior. What? And on that topic, you may notice as you play a lot of lighthearted sexism. You know, King's Bounty has always played sexist, extremely dated fantasy gaming tropes blatantly straight, in a way that no Western developer would have the balls to do, I think. I'm not one to be bothered by such things, especially when it's so lighthearted, but the sometimes casual disregard for political correctness would have a social justice warrior screaming their heads off. For me, it's more of an endearing quirk to be chuckled at. That being said, the dark side in particular is not all that bad about it. The female player character is a total ditz in dialogue, a real bimbo, and she gets ahead on her looks like your stereotypical dumb blonde, but she's also an extremely powerful succubus with a coterie of bee-spelled servants, and a giant army of badassery, single-handedly shaping entire kingdoms and championing the forces of darkness through the land. You grab and kidnap princesses like they're cattle, so you can give them to the dragons, because everyone knows that dragons love keeping princesses in pretty dresses. These girls, though, they become fearsome warriors riding dragons into battle, the most rare and powerful unit in the game by far. You meet a female NPC whose only ambition is, I want to marry a prince and live happily ever after in a castle. She's extremely pleased when you get her there, never mind that the prince is underage and an abysmal human being. It doesn't matter to her, she's happy as only a posh lady that married for money could be. On the other side of that spectrum though, you have Marie Curie, who is your best mad scientist. Utterly unconcerned with human suffering and is the #1 spewer of scientific gobbledygook in the entire game. She's a smart, ruthless cookie. Then you have the vampirist ruler of Monteville, who has the most ham-fisted and casual tale of slavery and rape you'll ever encounter, and she wants you to take revenge upon her former captors. But then later on, she gets the most interesting questline way later in the game. Spoilers! When she betrays you purely out of ambition, raising an undead army led by the zombified captains that you killed for her earlier. So you get the idea, this is all in the bad section because otherwise it could be construed that I endorse such portrayals and I don't want the internet to lynch me. But like I said, the writing and story as a whole is so silly in tone that it can be all dismissed with a chuckle and a shake of the head. Lighten up, people. There are 3 reasons why I kept playing this game past the point where I felt I'd mastered it. One of them is, in a simple word, curiosity. Look at this map. In the beginning it looks like this. By the end of the game you have uncovered every island one by one and it's damn cool to arrive at each one and figure it all out. I was constantly curious about what the next enemy would look like and the next units I might get to control. There's just so many of them. And with all the giant buildup of getting the MacGuffin from the Spirit of Darkness, I was ever so curious to see what happened when you finally got all the pieces and you gain access to the end of the game. I had to know what the final boss would be. It was actually pretty good. A fitting boss fight to the end of the story, but the ending cutscene though, not so much. Reason number 2, the character progression is satisfying, just like every RPG ever. It's nice to see those numbers go up. You start as the puniest loser in the world with only a handful of troops to your name, and you end up as a force of nature with thousands of creatures following in your wake. I got nothing deep or nuanced about this one, it's just the good old scratch to the lizard brain. Though I will say, progression and improvement in King's Bounty is a constant thing. Be it through leveling up, gathering golden resources, getting new items or skill points, it's all a continuous drip feed of that getting more powerful goodness. Finally, the 3rd reason is kind of a meta reason that could easily be interpreted as a negative. This is a slow-paced game. Nothing requires your immediate or constant attention. You can make a decision, then wait however long you want to make the next one. This makes it ideal to play while watching or listening to something else. I like to keep up with a few podcasts, watch for some cool YouTubers, see what's the deal with the newest Netflix show on offer, whatever, typical chair potato stuff. Since those don't often require your full attention, it's nice to have that low maintenance game that doesn't saturate your senses. Your SimCities and RimWorlds and, you guessed it, King Bounties of the gaming world. It feels so counterintuitive to mention this game doesn't command your full attention as a positive. But there it is, I would go home from work and after taking care of all the routine bullshit like working out and stuffing my face and taking a big fat dump in separate locations at separate times, I will plop down in front of the computer and go, I want to play a game. But also, I want to watch this stuff. And so the natural thought ensued, oh, I can do both if I play some King's Bounty. And so I've spent over 80 hours in it. In fact, every second of footage in this video has completely unusable audio because it also captured the sounds of whatever video I had on at the time.
Anyway.
Drop D. Yeah.
Also, I don't know off my heart the American national anthem, but I think this is roughly the structure.
Give me your interpretation.
Yeah.
I got it.
Oh, it's time for weird games from the shelf of our Nick.
So that was King's Bounty: The Dark Side. And now you know why I finished it.